KD on this team is just too much, man. Anyway, Adam Silver can fast forward this luxury tax.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. We're kicking off the season recap series of podcasts today and doing that with the team that has just less than a bit more than 24 hours ago at the time of recording acquired the number one pick in the 2018 NBA draft. And to discuss that team is the Australia's, or Basketball Monsters at least, biggest Phoenix Suns fan, Matt Smith. Welcome back.
Josh, that is true. And can you just repeat that? The number one draft pick. How good does that sound?
Well, I'm sure it sounds great for you, but Matt, I must offer something. As a trained medical professional, if your erection lasts for longer than 4 hours, you probably need to go see someone.
Well, watching Luka Doncic has that effect. So, yeah.
For everyone in Australia, Eastern time zone, because that's the only one that matters, 5 a.m. Saturday morning, Luka Doncic's Real Madrid will be playing in the semi-finals of the EuroLeague. It's on Foxtel on the Eurosport channel. I've got no idea what it's like for you guys in the rest of the world where that game is going to be played, but if you want to watch Luka Doncic play, 5 a.m. Saturday morning, set your Foxtel IQ, Eurosport, 5 a.m. It's going to be repeated across the weekend as well, but go and check that out. I know I've got that set on my tape to watch him in the semi-final matchup for Real, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of Doncic over the course of the last few months, but now more importantly over the next month, you're going to be digging in quite a bit. The Suns, Matt, it was a tough season, but I guess this result, this number one draft pick, not necessarily justifies it, but it's a reward. And we can talk about teams tanking, and many teams did, but the Suns weren't egregiously doing it. They weren't sitting swathes of players through the season. The majority of the guys played most of the time. Towards the end, we had Devin Booker and TJ Warren, them not pushing them to come back, and that's completely fair enough. That's totally understandable, but there wasn't as much bullshit going on with this team as we saw last year with the Eric Bledsoe, Tyson Chandler situation, or as we saw with, say, Memphis this season. And they ended up with the number one draft pick. They also have the 16th pick in the draft. They have the 31st pick in this draft and pick 59 as well. Not that that's going to have too much of an impact on things, but going back to this number one pick, Matt, I know which way you're leaning, but do you want to just tell us what your thoughts are on where the Suns you think should go in this with this selection?
Yeah, it's incredible to think that a number one draft pick has divided Phoenix Suns fans so much already. There's Team Doncic and there's a Team Ayton. I'm clearly Team Doncic. We've probably heard for the last 12 to 18 months about this kid from Europe, just incredible talent at 18, 19 years of age. But I guess what's made it more difficult for Suns fan is Ayton is from Arizona, right in Phoenix's backyard. I'm sure the guys in the front office have seen a lot of him. And yeah, it's divided Suns fans even in the last 24 hours when we've still got over a month to go. So it's going to be a massive talking point leading up to the draft in June.
I'm also looking at Doncic as the guy that I would want Phoenix to pick if I was their hypothetical GM. But they've got needs all over. They can say they need a big man. They need ball handlers. They need point guards. Elfrid Payton didn't work out. I don't believe in his stint in Phoenix, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the other thing we do have to talk about with Phoenix, Matt, is they have a new head coach. No more Earl Watson. Clearly, he was canned earlier in the season. No more Jay Triano, but instead we have Doncic's Slovenian national team head coach, Igor Kokoškov, the first European-born NBA head coach. Igor was an assistant coach for the Utah Jazz. So what do you know about Kokoškov in terms of his coaching style? We've seen him as an assistant and player development, but we've also seen him with the head reins over for Slovenia. So what can Suns fans and fantasy fans be expecting from what Kokoškov has done in his previous stops?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting point because that'll largely be dictated by who they take in the draft. Do they take Doncic and build that backcourt around him and Devin Booker, or do they add that big man up front in Ayton and work with maybe a Booker Ayton pick and roll and that way? So he's been highly regarded in Utah. Great development coach, apparently, really good with the players. The players have a ton of time for him, a lot of respect. And as you said, he's had success with the Slovenian national team over there in Europe, coached Luka Doncic and Goran Dragic, and been successful. So really looking forward to seeing what he can bring to the Suns next year, and hopefully develop guys like Dragan Bender and Marquise Chris and Josh Jackson in particular, and really bring this Suns team into a playoff team in the next couple of seasons.
It's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out. And I think, look, no matter where Doncic goes, whether it is Phoenix or Sacramento, he has a chance to be a top 50 fantasy guy. There's a few guys in this draft that do have that opportunity. I think he's one of them. Bumba could be, depending on where they go. Jaren Jackson's another guy who could be challenging for that top 50 or at least top 70 fantasy role for next season. So that'll be something for us to pay attention to. In terms of free agents on this team, Matt, we've got Alex Len as an unrestricted free agent. It seems almost impossible that he'll be back on this team. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different thought there?
No, I do think Alex Len is probably on his way out. And this is a little bit of the concern for mine about if the Suns do take Ayton. 3 of their last 4 top 10 picks have been bigs in terms of Alex Len, pick 5 in 2013, Dragan Bender, pick 4 in 2016, and they traded up to get Marquise Chris as well. So how much do they trust Bender and Chris and their development and their upside? Do they still believe that they were their next Amari Stoudemire and Sean Marion, which they were touted when they drafted them? Or do they, no longer have that confidence and faith in someone like Marquise Chris, who had a very poor season, to put it lightly, last season, and now looked for Ayton. So, in regards to Len, I don't think he's never really been shown the confidence of the coaching staff, but at the same time, when he has played, he hasn't sort of made the centre position his own and dominated. So unfortunately, I just don't know where Len goes in terms of his NBA career. To me, at the moment, he's a bit of a homeless man's Jonas Valanciunas. Maybe someone like the San Antonio Spurs sign him and develop him and make a role player out of him. But I don't think Alex Len will be on the Suns roster next season.
Alex Len led this team in PER, in win shares per 48, in box score plus minus, and he had the highest offensive rating on this team, which I think would be a shocker to many people, maybe even yourself, Matt, that he was that dominant in terms of advanced numbers. He only played 20 minutes per game, and what he did was get his efficiency way up, which he had struggled with before, up to 57% from the field. His shot blocking rate was up 0.9 blocks in 20 minutes, which is a decent rate of blocking those shots. Rebounded the ball well, and 8.5 and 7.5 doesn't seem like much, but in 20 minutes per game, it's not a bad return, and he was the 184th ranked fantasy player for the season. I'm with you. I think there is zero chance that he is back in Phoenix, but I thought he showed a lot more this season than what we'd seen in the past. He showed an ability at times to be dominant. Didn't happen always, and consistency was a problem, but he showed rim protection, he showed finishing ability. He also showed some of the dumb shit that's been a problem for him throughout his first 5 seasons in the NBA, but he stayed relatively healthy, played 69 games.
Giggity!
And was able to put up numbers and was an impactful player for this team. So, given the way that they have used him over the past couple of years, I think they misused him quite often, playing him at power forward next to Tyson Chandler, dicking him with the restricted free agent stuff. And I think he can still be a 25-minute, 26-minute starter on some team in the NBA, and showed enough of that this season. But of course, where he lands is going to be the big question. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this question for a minute. Who would you rather right now? Would you rather Alex Len or Aaron Baines?
Baines. Look, I guess it depends more on the team, but Baines more for his ability defensively, his positioning skills, his his ability to provide a body in there. But I guess if I was on a more talent-starved team, I would be looking at Len, still a younger guy, obviously, with a little bit more offensive upside and ability to at least carve out a bigger role. Whereas Baines, we know what he is. He's a limited guy who provides stout defense, good, decent enough rim protection, and a solid rebound. But I guess it depends a little bit on the team.
And I'm not sure if that says more about Aaron Baines and the Celtics and Brad Stevens coaching, or it does about Alex Len, sort of how far he has fallen after being a top 5 draft pick.
Yeah, look, he's definitely not that guy that's a top 5 draft pick. But again, I thought he showed enough this season to say he should be playing somewhere in the NBA next season. The other major free agent on this team is Lord Alfred Payton, who they acquired at the trade deadline for a second-round draft pick. He started off like crazy for this team, looked fantastic, and then just completely dropped off. Not only did his play drop off, but his playing time almost completely disappeared, and he was starting, but he was seeing very, very few minutes, and ended the season with a knee injury, left knee tendinopathy, which you might class as tanking, but he wasn't playing that much beforehand, and he was struggling a lot of the time. What do we make of his first couple of games? 19-6-9, 29-8-5, 13-11-12, 10-4-6, 13-6-11. It goes for a stretch here of almost 3 weeks, and then I don't know what happened. What happened to him, Matt? Why did the minutes get cut? Why was he just so out of favour? Yeah, after we hit the start of March, basically.
Yeah, I honestly don't know whether it was they played Tyler Eulis a little bit more. But yeah, he just completely dropped off. I think the Suns will bring him back next season, whether that's behind a Luka Doncic at point guard or whether he starts next to Devin Booker if they draft Ayton. But I have also heard whispers that the Suns are on the market for an experienced point guard, someone maybe like a John Wall, Kemba Walker, Kyle Lowry type.
Brandon Knight.
Brandon Knight, he'll be back next season, Josh. But yeah, I've got another question for you. Is Elfrid Payton still a starting point guard in this league?
I think he can be. I wouldn't be hitching my wagon. I've been a big Payton fan for a while, but his struggles at the end of this season were fairly pronounced. But again, he was efficient, 49% from the field. He averaged almost 13.6 assists, 4 rebounds, and 1.3 steals, but he takes a lot of plays off defensively. The lack of a three-point shot is obviously a concern for him. If he was starting on an NBA team that was not that good, I think it would be fine. He's only 24 years of age, but he's not a guy that I'd be looking to build around. His market's going to be really tepid. There's going to be very small offers, I would think, for him going around in many different in the free agency market. There's not going to be much money out there for him, so the Suns could very easily bring him back. But I think I would be under no illusion that they look at him as the starting point guard for this team in the future. Maybe it's a one-year bridge next season, but I don't think that they said this is our point guard and we're pretty set here. Other guys they've got here, Alex, we talked about the couple of two-way guys who are both restricted free agents, Alec Peters and Daniel House. They showed little bits and pieces, especially Alec Peters in the last game of the season, but Daniel House showed quite a bit when Devin Booker was out. And then you've got 3 guys with non-guaranteed contracts. Big Source, Alan Williams, Tyler Eulis, and Shaq Harrison. Williams was basically a lost season for him, Matt, with the knee injury, came back and then was out again with knee problems. I think there's a realistic chance that they do cut him if they are looking for salary cap space. I'm not 100% thinking that he is a definite return for them next season.
No, either am I. They've got a lot of money tied up with Tyson Chandler, Jared Dudley, and Alan Williams. So as you said, if they are looking to free up some cash and spend it on a big name free agent, they'll have to do something there, whether they can stretch Tyson Chandler's contract or, say buy out Alan Williams. We'll wait and see what the Suns can do in free agency as well.
They don't even need to buy out Williams. They can just cut him because the deal's it's non-guaranteed. So he's gone now. What about Eulis, who struggled mightily this season? Had a massive opportunity when Eric Bledsoe was traded. Did not take hold of it at all. Mike James had that role ahead of him. Really struggled. They were running Devin Booker at point guard. But then later in the season, very similar to what he did last year, came in and had a streak of 11 straight games of double-digit scoring, had a couple of double-digit assists games in there, rebounded well, hit the threes, and looked again like, hey, maybe this guy can be an interesting type of player. I think they will almost definitely guarantee that contract or keep him around, but where's his career at this point after a somewhat disappointing second season?
Yeah, I was really hoping they would give him the keys in the starting point guard role. When they traded Eric Bledsoe, they gave that to Mike James, and he had moments, and Tyler Eulis had moments, and a bit of a timeshare there. And then he just disappeared for the majority of the season. And then as you said, came back, had some good games towards the end of the season. But once again, he's a backup point guard, sort of 20 minutes a night role. But it's not only what the Suns do with that number one pick, what they do at 16, which will probably dictate what they do with some of these guys and then into free agency as well.
there are a number of point guards that could be available there at pick 16 for them as well. So, look, I think they'll keep Ulis around. He's only 22, but yeah, it was a relatively significant regression from him this season. Only 39% shooting. Yeah, started to pick it up at the end of the season, 29% from three. True shooting of 47 is horrendous. 4.5 assists across his 23 minutes and only 8 points, which is very similar to the numbers he put up last year, except last year he played 5 fewer minutes per game and shot the ball at a better rate, but still 2 seasons in the NBA as a point guard shooting under 30% from three and being not afraid to shoot that three is somewhat of a concern. And I don't really ever see Ulis becoming a starting point guard anywhere in the NBA, and that's going to limit, obviously, his fantasy value. But we see these stretches where he comes in, he can have these big games, and he can be useful at times because he can put up these numbers, but generally it comes when he is the focal point, as it was last year when Booker was out and he was playing 40 minutes and taking every shot under the sun. Pretty much the same thing happened this year when Booker was out, when Warren was out, he started, and Peyton was out, he started taking these shots and playing in a bigger role, but that's just not going to be something that he's going to be able to sustain throughout his NBA career given his size, and he needs to be able to work into that backup role, and he couldn't do that earlier on this season. And Shaq Harrison's the other one who's non-guaranteed. I thought we saw quite a bit from Shaq, especially as a defender. He averaged over a steal per game in 17 minutes in his 23 games. He is 24 years of age, but shot the ball okay. Finished okay, 48%, only 23% on threes, but was able to do what he needed to do. Do you think that Harrison is a rotation type player on a team like the Suns for next season?
On the team like the Suns, he might be if we're sort of struggling in the bottom half of the ladder for a playoff bound team. No, but yeah, once again we'll see what they do in the draft and yeah how it all shakes out from there. And just on Tyler Ulis from a fantasy point of view, if he does end up, whether it be the Suns or another team, and sort of in that 20 to 25 minute role, he can put up 4 or 5 assists a game. It's not a bad assist streaming option if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And he can get those assists in those minutes. On Harrison, he actually led this team in on-off rating. He was a plus 17.2 in his almost 400 minutes. And this is a real indication of how weird this team is. Daniel House was second, Alec Peters was third, Isaiah Cannon, Jared Dudley fourth and fifth, with Mike James sixth. So none of the players who were playing regular size minutes. In fact, the highest player in terms of on-off who played over 1,000 minutes was Alex Len, who was a plus 1.5. And the only other players who were a positive in that stat were Marquise Chris and Tyler Ulis. So some real struggles with numerous teams or numerous players on this team. Now, they finished the season, Matt, 21-61, which is a horrible record, but they actually overachieved based on what their expected win-loss is, which is based on net ratings. Their projected record was 19-63, so they actually got 2 extra wins there. They were the third highest team in pace, but somehow they managed to be the 30th ranked offense and the 30th ranked defense. They had the 30th ranked effective field goal percentage, 26th in amount of turnovers, couldn't rebound the ball very well, last in 3-point percentage, got 29th in assists. There's so much wrong with this team. So basically, they're a blank canvas in terms of what Kokoshkov can do, and there is only one direction they can go.
Well, that is true, and that is up. And the Suns just had serious troubles on the offensive end anytime Devin Booker and TJ Warren weren't on the floor. And they played 54 and 65 games respectively, and after that, it was bare with Chris struggling. Bender had all sorts of confidence issues throughout the season, shooting the ball. Had a couple of nice games towards the end. Josh Jackson, I'm assuming we'll speak about shortly. But yeah, and as you said, with defensive, Tyson Chandler was just a folding chair out there at points. So yeah, they need a major overhaul and really need to develop some of these players as quick as they can.
In terms of, I said that Alex Len had the highest offensive rating, the highest defensive rating on this team, Matt. 2 guys tied. Alan Williams was on top, but he only played 5 games. So who would you say would have had the best defensive rating on this team?
Oh boy. I'll guess Josh Jackson.
No, it was not Josh Jackson. It was another one of it was two young players, but that's basically the entire team. One of them was Shaq Harrison, and the other was your mate Marquise Chris, which that surprised me a little bit. It didn't surprise me that Troy Daniels had the worst defensive rating on this team, but what also surprised me was Josh Jackson's offensive rating was horrendous. 93 points per 100 possessions is just not good for that player, but he was a guy whose season, and we'll talk about him now, was really a season of 2 halves, or maybe a 2/3 and a third, because he was bad to start the season. horrendous shot selection, looked lost out there defensively. He couldn't really do anything. But towards the end of the season, and maybe January onwards, mid-January onwards, he looked really solid. Now, some of that was without Booker and Warren playing a larger role for Joshy here. But overall, how would you grade his season?
I think I'd probably give him a B. Like you said, struggled in the first half. Run home was excellent, but like I said again, without Devin Booker there, it looked great in transition when the Suns got out, were running. Josh Jackson attacking the basket, not so great in the half court. And I think you'll have some stats to back that up. The further he got away from the basket, the worse his shot was. But one of his biggest assets from my point of view from the season was his ability to get to the free throw line. After the All-Star break, that got there at 5.5 attempts per game. Now he only made 3.8 of those for 68% from the line. But that was a real strength of his. Defensively, he was well in terms of his it was a defensive rating. I think you said he was poor, but his ability to rack up steals and then blocks towards the end of the season from a fantasy point of view was pretty good. So I think there's a lot to like there with Josh Jackson, and he'll be a key piece going forward next to Devin Booker.
I'll give you his shooting numbers here. He was in the 16th percentile in finishing at the rim, just 56%. Obviously, that's bad. In the second percentile on shooting corner threes at 26%. That is horrible. In the 6th percentile, it's shooting threes overall at 26%. Again, horrible. And below the 50th percentile in all his mid-range shooting, 35% from mid-range, which was 42nd percentile. And really, horrible shooting numbers from him for the majority of the season. And that's one of those things that I think is going to be able to hold him back in fantasy, is those percentages. You touched on blocks and steal numbers. They were solid from him and they started to improve. But he's a guy that over the last 20 games of the year was the 118th ranked fantasy player, and that would have been a lot higher, bar from the fact that he shot 44% on 16 attempts, which is bad, and 68% on 5.5 attempts from the line, which again is a real negative, and that's pushing into almost punt territory given that volume. It's almost a -2 in terms of standard score in that area, but average 19 points, 6 rebounds, 1.6 steals, half a block. There's stuff there to work with, but it's got to come in efficiency. And we do see second-year players improve on that quite a bit. He was dealing with an elevated usage of 29% over those final 20 games. Couldn't get the efficiency going, which tied in with his theme for the season. And that is where he needs to improve. Do you think that he will be locked in as a starter beginning next season, or will they go back to TJ Warren?
That's a really good question. I said this at the start of the season, and I still believe it. I still think TJ Warren is a perfect six-man type coming off the bench. So we know he can score in bunches. Like I said, when Devin Booker was off the floor, they really needed someone offensively, and TJ Warren can offer that. So a starting lineup of hypothetically Doncic, Booker, Jackson, and then whether they go Chris and Bender, whether they go Peyton, Booker, Jackson, Warren, Bender. They've got a couple of options there. But I think they really need to get as many minutes together as they can with Josh Jackson and Devin Booker. And like I said, I think eventually TJ Warren is that perfect six-man type.
Yeah, I think that's the way that Kokoshkov will go. We'll obviously need to see how everything pans out, but I think that'll be the direction that they would be heading in. Now, let's talk about the best player on this team, a player who took a massive step forward this season, and that is Devin Booker, who was the 29th ranked player overall in fantasy for the year at the age of 21. He hasn't turned 22 for quite a while as well. But Matt, for the second consecutive season, injuries were a problem. He managed only 54 games this season and sat out large stretches down the end of the year.
Yeah, and I would like to know how serious that hand injury was. If they were on a playoff run, I'm pretty confident that Devin Booker would have been playing, but
I agree.
Obviously, with their situation, there was no need to bring him back and win some games like someone like the Orlando Magic did. 76 games in his first season, 78, and then just the 54. But he increased his points, rebounds, assists, and threes per game. As you said, finished a top 30 player on a per game basis, and I think that's about where we can look to draft him next year is somewhere in that third round.
So what he was able to do this season as opposed to last season, his assists up to 4.7, up from 3.4. That's huge. His rebounding went up from 3.2 to 4.5, also huge. And this is in fewer minutes as well, half a minute less, but still. His three-pointers, and he'd always been like, this is an excellent three-point. He's Klay Thompson, which is just a bullshit comparison. But anyway, that's what people used to throw out there. But he'd never been a great three-point shooter. 34% in his first year and 36% in his second season. This season, he turned it up a notch. He went to 38% from three, a true shooting of 56, which is right on league average. So we do have to really be careful of these narratives of this guy being this electric knockdown shooter. He's a good scorer, but he hadn't shown an elite ability to shoot. Did it this year from the three-point line, but still, overall, just 43% from the field on 20 attempts per game is a real drag on your field goal percentage. He offsets it by being excellent at the free throw percentage, but that is something that you do have to watch for from Booker. The 25-point average per game, that could realistically be something that goes down depending on who gets brought in, whether it's Ayton or Doncic or a bigger role for Jackson. He might not have to shoulder as large of a load as he did this season, but that could be offset by an increase in efficiency. But I think if Booker became a top 20 player next season, I don't think I'd be overly surprised by that.
No, I don't think so, and that might be the key if we do bring in Doncic or Ayton and they take on a bit of offensive responsibility and he drops down to 21, 22 points per game, but his field goal percentage goes to 45, 46. All of a sudden, that's a big boost to his value. You get the steals up over a steal a game as well. 5 rebounds, 5 assists. It's not a bad pick there from a hopefully a third round player.
The steals is something that I'm not sure he's ever going to be able to really get to. He is, honestly, one of the worst defenders that plays big minutes in the NBA, and that is always going to be something that holds him back, I guess, in his real-life status, but also from a fantasy point of view, is getting those steals. But you're right, if he gets to 46% from the field and goes down a couple of points, that will probably bump him up closer to that top 20 than where he currently is, and he's still got heaps of improvement still in him, and getting other good players around him should be able to help him in that way, whether that is Ayton or Doncic or whatever they end up doing with that draft choice. Let's talk Tony Warren Jr., who had another strong season, almost averaged 20 points, 19.6 points in his 33 minutes. Still not a guy that's shooting the three, 22%, 0.3 triples made per game, 5 rebounds, a steal. But his value comes from efficiency, Matt. 50% from the field, 76 from the line. But I would think that we'll see a little bit of a step back in terms of usage and playing time from Warren next season. But we've touched on that a little bit more. And he was the 85th ranked player. Do you think there's any realm of possibility that he becomes better next season?
He might become better in terms of an all-round player. I'm not sure if he can be better in terms of his fantasy rank. I think that sort of 80 mark is about his ceiling. He only offered a positive contribution in 2 categories, and they were points and field goal percentage. So sort of 49, 50% from the field for that small forward position is a real bonus. But yeah, the lack of threes and assists and some of the other counting stats really hurt his game. So we'll see what Coach K does with him next season. And reiterate my point that I think he's a perfect 6-man candidate.
He is a really strong offensive rebounder as well, almost averaged 2 offensive boards per game, which is a really strong number, especially for a wing. So he was quite good in that area. But that 3-point shot, at this point, we just have to expect that it's not really ever going to come around. He's not going to start taking a huge amount of attempts there. But if you're scoring 20 points on 50% shooting, that is pretty impressive. And that steal rate still needs a little bit of work to improve on there. Now, Tyson Chandler played probably way too much this season, 25 minutes per game, 46 games, but again, was out of the rotation as the season wound down with a neck injury. 6.5 points, 9 rebounds, 0.6 blocks for Tyson, almost 36 years of age. Did what he does and finishes efficiently, but surely, Matt, we see a smaller role for Tyson next season.
Yeah, and surely by smaller you mean 0.
Yeah.
But they just need to turn Tyson Chandler and Jared Dudley into the locker room guys. Just you see Jared Dudley all the time picking up tech fouls, just defending his players and teammates, and it's awesome to see someone who's got the back of his teammates and younger players. But they're really there for the locker room, the chemistry, need to really help develop these guys off the court and at training.
let's talk about the guy that I have labelled at times the dumbest player in the NBA. I'm sure you know who it is. It's Marquise Chris, who was absolutely horrendous for the majority of this season. Ranked the 219th player this year, only 21 minutes per game. He is still not yet 21, so he's quite young. 7.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 0.8 threes, 0.7 steals, and 0.1 blocks, which is pretty much in line with what we thought he could do. We thought he could be a 1-1, bordering on 1.5 sort of guy if he could stay out of foul trouble and stay on the court. The problem is he couldn't do that because his play was just so poor. His ability to rack up fouls was just elite, really, and that limited him. And we saw Triano just say, well, screw this shit, like, you're just not getting on the court. But in all fairness, and I try and be fair with everyone that I'm speaking about, he improved in the second half of the season, and I thought he looked a lot better for someone who's really paying attention to the Suns. Matt, did you share those sentiments about the way that Chris looked over the last 2 months of the season?
Yeah, well, Chris was a real interesting one because I believe over the last off-season, the Suns wanted him to put on a bit of bulk and beef up so he could play centre and bang with some of those guys. And then he came back and he just had a massive backside and looked a bit overweight and too heavy. So it'll be really important going into next season that they're on the same page in terms of his conditioning and what role he will play, whether that's a centre or a power forward. But yeah, like you said, from a fantasy point of view, the flirting with a 1-1 is so tasty, yet he's averaging 3 fouls in 21 minutes over his career, so he just can't stay on the floor. The amount of times that he picks up 2 fouls within the first 2 to 3 minutes of the game is just unbelievable. So once again, we'll see what Kokoshkov can do with him and Dragan Bender and see how quickly they can develop them. And like I said before, whether Ryan McDonough and the front office still have faith in Chris and Bender to get the job done, or whether Aiton's the answer and these guys are now going to be backups.
In the last 10 games of the season, he scored in double digits 9 times, including twice over 20 points. He blocked at least one shot in 7 of those 10 games, and he was starting for the last 8 of those 10 games. And 2 of his last 3 games were a 22-9 game against the Warriors and a 23-8 game against the Pelicans in 31 and 27 minutes respectively. So he did look stronger down the stretch, but he just was horrendous for so much of the season. Shot just 42% from the field, down from 45 as a rookie. Under 30 from 3. Yeah, poor true shooting percentages. Rebounds are definitely not his strong suit. 5.5 was an improvement, but still not a great number. But as I've said so many times, he's not a good player at this point. But if he's on the court for minutes, the stats will come. He will get the steals. He will get blocks. He will hit threes. He will find his way into being a top 100 player if he can stay on the court. And we saw at least a sign of that. And Kokoshkov's got to get through him. He's got to get rid of that giant ass that he was sporting at the start of last season. And I still think there is an element of hope that at least if he's out there playing minutes, the stats will come. I don't ever think he's going to develop into some excellent sort of fantasy guy or real life player. But this is his 3rd season. This is a big turning point for a lot of guys. He's a young player, so we'll see what happens after this one. But I'm skeptical, but I still think that there can be some decent numbers put up by Marquise heading into this season. Now, the other player, Matt, that is always lumped together with Marquise Chris is the guy that was selected 5 spots ahead of him, or 4 spots, I don't remember, I think 4 spots,
Yep.
In the 2016 draft. Dragan Bender, who improved this season, but he's one of these guys that I don't think is ever going to be a fantasy useful player. 20 years of age, younger than Marquise Chris. Played all 82 games and played 25 minutes, but he just doesn't rack up numbers. 6.5 and 4.5 points and rebounds, 1.5 threes, 0.6 blocks. Inefficient from the field, 39%, but at least he shot 37 from 3. He got his free throw percentage back to 77%, which is more indicative of what he was able to do in Europe. And he can provide some switchability on defense. He can pass the ball, but it doesn't show up in the stat sheet, and that's always going to be an issue for us in terms of fantasy value. But what it could do is if he does take those steps forward, it's going to keep Marquise Chris out of those larger minutes, which would translate into fantasy numbers.
Yeah, and like I said before, he lacked so much confidence. There was times when they'd pass the ball around and it'd get to Bender, open on the wing for 3, and he just wouldn't shoot it. And you can feel, everyone watching and everyone in the crowd just like, shoot it, and he wouldn't. And then he'd pass, and then the ball go back around in circles for another 10 seconds. So towards the end of the season, that he started to get that confidence and learn to shoot. And but we just need to see him be so much more aggressive on offense. So hopefully whether it's Coach K and a bit more experience can can give him that confidence. But yeah, over the last 3 months of the season, he played 30 minutes a game and only averaged 7 points per game on 37% from the field, 78 from the free throw line. So I'm still holding out hope that at least one of these guys turns into a decent, reliable power forward centre option. But yeah, the next 2 years are really going to be key.
Just a real minuscule usage from Bender, only 12% usage, and that's part of what you're saying in his hesitancy. I thought he defended well. It doesn't really show up on the stat sheet all that much, just 0.3 steals and 0.6 blocks this season to go with his 6.5 points. And if he ever had a top 100 fantasy season, I'd be pretty shocked, to be honest, because that just isn't the guy that he is. It's not what the numbers were suggesting he'd do when he was in Europe. He just plays solidly, needs more of that offensive confidence, but can pass, can defend, can get out into space. But he's not a great rim protector. He's not going to be a huge shot blocker. He's not going to be a volume scorer. He's not going to be a guy that's generating tons of assists despite his good passing. So there's really limited upside in terms of his overall fantasy value. But at least he took steps forward. And Matt, I'll ask you the question. Who do you think is going to be the better player between him and Chris?
Real life or fantasy?
Fantasy, I think it's clearly Chris, but
Chris,
real life.
Real life, probably still Bender. But it's close, yeah. Chris for fantasy, and I feel like, yeah, both of them, once again, whether it's a lack of confidence or lack of experience, but they just need to play with a bit more aggression and flair. They need a bit of Devin Booker and Josh Jackson's arrogance, if you like, and ego, and just get that into them. Need to grab the ball by the horns and get out there and dominate, boys.
Troy Daniels came across from Memphis, ended up playing quite a bit, actually, 21 minutes a game, 79 games played, was playing in the Devin Booker role at times when Booker was out, was that thumb injury. Ended up hitting 2.3 triples per game. Is another one of those guys that I talk about. If you want threes, you can find him anywhere on the waiver wire. Like a guy like Troy Daniels. Now, he's not doing too much else, but good free throw percentage. He's getting you 2.3 triples per game, and that's a beautiful thing to stream in. You can get those sort of numbers from him despite the deficiencies in other areas. But he is a guy that the Suns would be hoping they could find other guys to take that role, or at least they have Booker healthy for 80 games instead of 50, and then Daniels' impact will be limited. But he provided what he needed to provide. I just don't know if it's ever getting any better than this for Troy Daniels.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is probably about his ceiling. Not quite sure what his role will be next year. We'll see whether Brandon Knight can make any sort of impact coming back and how he's used. But as you said, Troy Daniels averaged 2.7 threes through December and January, and just an awesome threes streaming option, and had some big games of sort of 6 and 7 threes per game as well. So that's why I personally don't really go hunting for them too early in drafts, because you can find them readily available on waiver wires.
We've mentioned Brandon Knight's name a couple of times, and I wouldn't be surprised if many people have forgotten that he actually exists. And I think that there is a legitimate chance that he could be the starting point guard on opening night, depending on what they do with Elfrid Payton. Knight has had some pretty good seasons. Now, in Phoenix, he's been horrible, but he had some decent stretches in Phoenix as well. Like, it wasn't like he was, as soon as he was traded from Milwaukee, that he became trash. He had some decent stretches. He has been a malcontent in the locker room with some of the tanking stuff he wasn't happy with, the ACL injury last season, but now there is an opportunity for him to slide back in and at least play a decent role. And we've seen him have top 60 fantasy seasons before. Now, I think expecting that's probably going too far, but he could very, very easily find himself as a top 200, top 150, maybe even top 100 player next year. An ACL is not the death knell of someone's career. They can very easily come back at a similar level. We saw it from Jabari Parker after his first ACL, the second one not so much. Zach LaVine looked fine, apart from the atrocious defense, which was there before. The poor shot selection, which was there before as well. But Knight could find himself in a significant role this next season.
Yeah, and that's the point. If they do take Ayton and maybe then they start Elfrid Payton as that pass-first point guard with Booker and Ayton on the floor, and then all of a sudden, if you've got Brandon Knight and TJ Warren coming off the bench with a bit more of a scoring punch, he might be able to carve out, a decent 20, 25 minute per game role. So, he's another one just to keep an eye on, and we'll know more about him once training camps and the off-season begin and head through into October and another fantasy season.
Last player I want to get your opinion on here, Matt. I spoke about him on one of the draft recap podcasts, and that's Davon Reed, whose early season was ruined by a meniscus injury. He came back, he played 21 games for the Suns. He is a 22-year-old rookie. 3 points per game, 2 rebounds, just shot horrendously, a true shooting of 39%, 29 from the field. Is there anything that we saw from him in that time, or his games for the G League, where we think, all right, well, maybe he is replacing a Troy Daniels in the rotation. Maybe he does make Shaq Harrison expendable if they want to get some extra cap space. Was there anything from Reed that where you went, oh, maybe we've got something here?
Yeah, I didn't mind the pick at 32 last season. He's a big boy. He's 6'6", but he's built. He's wide, big and strong. Really struggled with the 3-point shot. Bit of a 3-and-D type guy. I think I'd have him ahead of Shaquille Harrison. I think you'd probably have him behind Troy Daniels, though, as Daniels is that pure 3-point shooter who can spread the floor. I don't know what you said about Reed, but I'd be interested to find out.
I don't remember what it was exactly. I'm trying to think what episode it was in. Probably part 8, I would say, of the draft recap stuff. Look, I thought that he showed a little bit in terms of defensive stuff, but the offensive lack of shooting was a real problem. But I have to give him a little bit of a pass coming back from the knee injury in his rookie season. But I don't ever see anything of him becoming more than an 8th or 9th man, really sort of a guy. But providing some defensive stuff, a really nice steal rate, half a steal in 11 minutes per game is really good across those 21 games. So there's a little bit of something to work on there, but that's similar to what Shaq Harrison was doing, who averaged 1.1 steals in his 17 minutes. But you got to be able to knock down some shots, not at this horrendous rate that he was going at, where he couldn't finish at the rim, he couldn't draw fouls, he couldn't hit threes, he couldn't really do anything offensively. But coming in without really too much of a preseason in terms of the knee injury, that clearly set him back, and just getting some minutes into him, I think, is considered a win. But I don't ever see him as any sort of starter caliber player, despite being picked relatively high at pick 32. So we'll see how that all pans out in the end. Matt, I don't know if there's much more to talk about here with Phoenix. Anything else you want to throw in for your Suns?
No, I don't think so. So yeah, from a neutral point of view your team Doncic as well.
Yep. Yeah, I am. I think that Doncic is the best player in this draft class. He's obviously still really, really young. I don't even think he's turned 19 yet. Doing it at a high level.
Just 19, okay. I think a couple of months ago. Just your thoughts on Ayton?
Obviously did a lot of stuff offensively, crashing the boards. I fear that some of that is, Matt, this isn't going to resonate with all that many people, but it gives me the impression of AFL draftees, the big power forwards who come in and tear up the TAC Cup or the SANFL, and they get in the AFL and they got no idea what they're doing because they've been beating up on people that they've always been way, way bigger than, and then they get to a situation where everyone is a similar size and has similar strength and speed, and they're really out of their depth in that area. I get that fear. To a degree, his defensive limitations are a concern. Not the greatest rim protector, not a good defender in space. Spaces out a little bit with his defensive positioning, and that's a real concern at that position. You can say, oh, you know what, he's going to score a lot of points, but that's not necessarily what you need out of a center. You need centers who are going to provide solid defensive fundamentals, call the defense, run things, organize things, and at this point, I don't see that for him, and that's what makes me look at guys like Bumba or Jackson as being perhaps equivalent or maybe even superior to him, despite him having this superior offensive talent. It's just not the way the league goes. We don't, we don't need. It's a rarity to get these big, massive centers who are just dominating everything in post ups. And he can hit the three to a degree. I just don't know that he is that. And people are writing he's the only can't miss prospect in this draft. Yeah. That's bullshit. Yeah. That is just an absolute load of shit. No one's can't miss for a start. No one's can't fail. That doesn't exist. And if it's him, and if it's anyone, it's not him. He has deficiencies that are significant. You can go back and read Jahlil Okafor scouting reports. 20 points, no worries. Best post moves. You're going to come in as elite player. You're going to score. It's bullshit. And that's some of the concern I have for Ayton. Not that they're the same player, but there is that defensive limitations which could get him worked pretty quickly.
And we've seen like one of the best defensive centers in the league in Clint Capella at the moment spend a fair bit of time on the bench, and with both the Rockets and Warriors already going small with, PJ Tucker versus Kevin Durant at center, and Eric Gordon out there today hit 6 or 7 3-pointers. So that's another reason why I'm on Luka Doncic, because he can play the 1 and the 2 and coexist with Devin Booker, but then can defend, more of a 2 and a 3. And his passing ability and his court vision, and then his natural scoring and shooting as well. So, there's been a fair bit written and said already, and a lot of some tripe coming out of Phoenix. And
shout out to Gambo.
You picked that up, did you?
Yeah, I did, I read it today.
And an anonymous scouting report, which was fairly negative on Luka Doncic. So I'm going to stick up for him. He's my boy. Get on board. And if we pass, then Sacramento Kings, if you take him, you'll have a piece of my heart as well.
All right, let's see how all that pans out. Matt, where can people follow you on Twitter?
Yep, follow me on Twitter at SManSports. Obviously, always willing to discuss fantasy over there. Come and have a chat about the playoffs, draft, who the Suns should or shouldn't take at number 1, and get on board.
Go and chat with Matt over there. Go and give him all your Doncic versus Ayton takes on Twitter as well. And you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. Go subscribe to this podcast, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube, and of course Apple Podcasts, where you can go leave that 5-star review because I know you want to. Matt, thanks for coming on the show once again.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you.
All right, guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Jared Dudley.